Well, welcome back to another episode of the Mars Drone. This time we're doing EV SUV depreciation, some of the absolute bargains that are out there. We've already done EVs. This time it's for those of you who want electric but need to have an SUV for some reason. And there are some colossal deals to go through in this video. We're going to do UK and USA depreciation. And we're going to start off with one that didn't make the list, but I thought I had to include it. It's UK only, this very first one. Most of these are both markets. A couple of them are US only. But we're going to start with one because of American tariffs on Chinese cars. We don't get this one. The UK do. It's the new, and I mean the brand new, just released MG MGS5. Okay, this is the 2025 onwards model that's an SUV. And already you can get these nearly new, so sort of been registered by the dealer. 29.6% depreciation was the average figure. So a couple at 31%, a couple around the 25%. If you go onto UK Auto Trader, you should be able to find this brand new model, just came out already, nearly a third of its value, wiped out. Dealers are getting them out there into the market. And I think if that vehicle does become a success, it's just come out. I haven't driven it yet, so I can't comment on how it drives. But if that vehicle does sort of get what they're hoping for, which is, a little bit of traction behind it, I don't think we'll see all that deal come out again. So if you've been thinking, yeah, brand new, not too bothered about having a manufacturer you don't know too much about, that could be the one. Now we're going to go into the top 12 list. And the first one, this is it's from a company that always baffle me a little bit because they try to do things a little bit like the industry that they're surrounded by, but they always go a little bit left field. They are the makers of the Nissan GTR. So in this case, it's the Nissan Ariya. Now, the Ariya won Car of the Year for one of the magazines I used to work for. And honestly, at the time, I thought that was a bit of a peculiar choice. However, since then, the Ariya has really proven itself to be a pretty competitive, I should say, EV SUV on the market. Those of you that question whether it's really an SUV, you'll find this with a lot of these cars. They're sort of in that crossover territory, but they officially get SUV designation. The interesting thing with the Ariya, I think it was a British couple. It may have been European, but there's a couple who are explorers, and they have driven this car pole to pole. So 27,000 kilometers driven in this car with sort of a wind generator on the back of it that they were towing along, just to prove that they could actually, use this car as an exploratory car like you would, say, a diesel pickup truck. 47.9% depreciation in the UK, 44.4% in the USA. So a little bit stronger in the US than in the UK, but that is for a 2023 model. So these are the ones that people got brand new in 2023. They're just coming to the end of that 3-year lease, and they're coming onto the market at nearly half off. And I did find a few that were a little bit higher mileage that were half off. So if you're out there, you've had Nissans before, maybe you've had a Qashqai or one of their other sort of crossover SUVs, or you've had a Rogue, I think, in the US, or X-Trail over here, and you're looking at EV this time, that could be one to check out. Now, the next car on the list is where we step into, I would say, controversial design. It's the best way I can put this one. But the car underneath that design is actually really capable. And a lot of people wrote it off because how it looks. It's the BMW iX, and I picked out the xDrive 50 model. You can have a 70 model, that's the really high power one, and there is the lower spec 40 model. The 40 is actually a pretty nice car, and I wouldn't discount it, but just managed to find a few deals on 50, and I thought, hey, it's a slight step up. What are the numbers going to be like? So for a 2022 car, still this is a really new car, 52.2% in the UK, and almost identical figures in the USA, 52.5%. Okay. If you're wondering how we work out these metrics, so we're looking at live data across some of the most popular websites in the UK, USA. I do have a little look over at Europe as well. And Europe, for most of these, are about in the middle between the US and the UK. If there's an outlier, I will pick it up, but I don't think there is as we go through. The interesting thing for me for the iX is that really most BMW buyers, they pushed it off to the side. I think the styling was a little bit too much of a step change for a lot of people, especially back in the 2020, 2021, 2022 when this car came out. So I think for a lot of people, just the styling wasn't what they wanted. But now used, considering how well they drive, and I mean, they do, it's an oddity because if you can ignore, oh, I mean, maybe you like the styling, but if you don't like the styling, if you can ignore the way it looks on the outside, you know, they actually, for a legacy manufacturer trying to bring sort of a real competitor into the market, into the SUV arena, this was a good car. Okay. So, I would seriously have a look at it, especially at over half off. And because you're looking at a car that is 3, those 4-year leases are coming to an end as well. If you can find one that's been well taken care of. I mentioned in the previous EV video, there's lots of companies that are now setting up that will either be able to take care of battery packs, can repair them for much, much cheaper than they've ever come up before, but also check them on servicing. And I think that's going to be a real critical point. But there are other companies that are setting up to give a health score to batteries. And I would look for one of these in any market that you're in and see if the seller has done a health score on the battery, because the ones I found, it is actually sort of standard now. If you're in the automotive industry and you're buying from auctions, it's standard that they come up with a score, with a health score. It's Avalo is quite a popular one, or Avalu, quite a popular company. And a lot of these had more than 90% of their battery capacity left. So a real consideration. The next car, though, is another BMW, but this one is for the UK only. And I think it's a real shame. This is the BMW iX3. It's the previous generation model. The new iX3 will be coming to the US as well as Europe and the rest of the world. Unfortunately, this previous generation, it didn't go to the US, but 54% off in the UK for a 2021 model. I have a friend that has one of these cars. He's had it for a couple of years now, loves it. And the fact that I think there's a lot of you out there that want to buy an EV, but don't want something that is sort of screaming about the fact that it is an EV. A lot of manufacturers, I feel, previously fell into the trap of trying to do something wild and different, thinking that EV buyers were different to regular car buyers. And largely they're not. They just want a car. They would like it to be nice in a lot of different ways. And the fact the powertrain is different, well, it's different. Diesel, petrol, plug-in, EV. The iX3 really nails the idea that you can buy a car. And if, the front grille is different on the iX3. A friend of mine actually just bought some cheap black kidney grills off of eBay and swapped them out because he didn't want the car to look different than the regular X3. You can't tell driving down the road whether that's an iX3 or a regular X3. So if you're that buyer, over half off on a 2021 model, again, the batteries seem to be lasting pretty well, over 90% of their health score on a lot of the ones that I saw that had average mileage. Now, I will put that caveat in there solely because I did find quite a few high mileage ones a lot cheaper than this, about 65% off. But the battery scores were dropping off. And I think that's people that bought these needed to charge them a lot because they were doing a lot of mileage. They're using a lot of fast charging. They're not necessarily taking care of the battery as they need to because they just need the car when they need it. And they can't sort of think, oh, okay, I'm not using the car next week. I'll just charge it to 80% at home on a slow charge or whatever it may be. The next generation of batteries that we come up, we're going to go into with the next iX3, I think are going to be a step change in that. But we're still dealing with the sort of previous generation. The conversation we have a lot with electric cars is, when's the next generation coming through and how different will it be? But I think if you're in the market for a used one, this one particularly could be something to tickle your fancy. And it's a shame the US didn't get it, but you can check out the iX. Now, number 4 on the list is a very, funny enough, if you're in Europe, this is a very left field pick. It's way out there. You wouldn't come to mind at all. If you're in the US though, this is a more popular car and it shows in the residuals. So the Genesis GV60, 2022, they're still making it in 2025. They're coming up with a few sort of sporty packages for it in 2026. But if you want a 2022 one with average mileage, 55% of its value is gone in the UK. In the USA, and I think because you've got better support system around Genesis in a lot of Europe, they're pretty sort of small dealer networks. If you're not in the area, you've got a long drive. Not so much in the US. So 41.7%. And in this, of all the cars I'm going to bring up, probably has the widest gap between US depreciation and UK. Ultimately, though, the car itself ignoring everything else, the car itself to drive is, if you're used to the Japanese cars that are sort of on the luxury end, Lexus could be an easy pick out. This will be quite an easy transfer in for you. If you're more used to European luxury manufacturers, this might feel a little bit different. And the way, this really does sort of sit on the edge of crossover SUV territory, but ultimately they market it as an SUV. I think one of the things you're going to hear me say as we go through this, there are really no big SUVs yet. They're coming through in 2025, but there really weren't that many that were released back sort of 3-4 years ago. They are all more the crossover size. But if you're in Europe, particularly, the US, it's not such a great deal. But in the UK, in Europe, if you're interested in one of these, you can get a colossal discount. And as far as I could see, warranty cover was pretty good. Owner feedback, interesting one for me. As you know, we do loads of buyer's guides on the channel, so it's one of the things I really do value is getting owner feedback. And the Genesis GV60, it's a small sample size, but there was a lot of positives said about them. So can't say too much fairer than that. Now, the next one, I think this is one of the ones that many of you will put high up on the list, but then may later take it off of your list for a variety of reasons. One of them is that the company itself have said they are moving into the next generation of batteries. Mercedes-Benz EQB 2022, 57% off, 57.1 actually was the final figure for the UK, and 52.3% in the USA. And interestingly, the guy who runs the local Chinese restaurant actually has one of these. I asked him the other day, I said, what do you think of it? You've obviously had it a couple of years. He has it on a business lease. He was just explaining to me that actually his next car will definitely be another Mercedes SUV electric. He's loved it. He had Mercedes previous to that. He buys Mercedes. He likes them. I think this is quite a common story with a lot of Mercedes buyers. They bought one and then they keep buying. But this was the first time he had gone full EV. He did say to me he probably would be tempted by an EQC next time. The EQB was big enough, but he might just look to step up in size. So I would say if you're interested in one of these, go and sit in it. If you've got a family, if you've got a dog, if you've got, take things with you, or if you're a bit taller or a bit bigger and you really want to make sure you're comfortable, I would, before you put it on your shortlist, turn up to a dealer, just say, do you mind if I have a sit in one and just see if it's got enough space for me? And then move it onto your shortlist as a good used buy in this category. But the one thing I will say is it's had a real hit of its value. And I think on this particular car, that will probably continue, mainly because we are seeing Mercedes move into its new generation of cars. The latest GLA platform, or GLA car, sorry, and the GLA wagon have kind of proven that Mercedes are moving their battery tech off after their prototype a few years ago. They really have sort of moved forward, and the idea of more range, more efficiency is coming into the Mercedes line. So this car, when it's replaced, will probably have quite a big improvement, and that will probably further knock residuals. So if you're looking to buy and keep a while, you can get a bargain and accept the fact that at the end it probably won't be worth a lot anyway. If you're one of these people that keeps a car maybe a year, 2 years, this might not be the car. Next on the list is the car that started with all the criticism. It picked a name, and I still think to this day it probably shouldn't have taken the name that it did. I can understand why Ford did it, and that probably gives you a clue. But ultimately, it was always going to put a rod in the back of this car's marketing team, because you really have to stand up to the test of a legacy when you do this. So it's the Ford Mustang Mach-E, 2021 year vehicles with average mileage are 58.3% depreciated from their new list price in the UK. But in America, interestingly, they're 43.2% was the number I set it on. You can get it to about 50%, but mileage, I was trying to look for the better examples, because what I don't want to do in this video is sort of say to you, oh, you can get colossal deals, and then you go and have a look on whichever website you like to use for used cars, and say, well, yeah, but they're cars I would never buy. They're all, 100,000 miles, dented in every corner. No, I've tried to find the ones that are the middle ground, not the absolute best out there that are asking the top money, but not the ones that are sort of cheap for a reason, if you like. So in the US, the ones of these that have been taken care of, maybe they've had a single owner from new, preferably they've been privately owned and people have been sort of cautious with the battery and really taking care of it. The advantage you have of this if you're in the US or in Europe is it still a Ford. Yes, the platform is different, so there are other vehicles, and yes, it doesn't have an engine, so some Ford dealers I feel still are a little bit lacking in knowledge. You know, they've probably only got one person there that really works on their EVs, but they are getting a lot better, and I've seen that improvement over the last year or two. So I think now you can own these pretty safely in knowing if you're not that into cars, if you don't know a specialist and you just want to run it into your local Ford dealer, you can do with one of these, even if it is a used one from say 2021, even maybe squeeze yourself into 2022. Now the next car, it's a bit like that BMW iX3 actually, because it doesn't shout out that it's an EV and it doesn't try to be anything different, but it is available in both the UK and the USA, and that is the Volvo XC40 Recharge. Now, I should have mentioned that there's a buyer's guide for the Mustang Mach-E on the channel, and there is a buyer's guide for the XC40 where I cover off the Recharge model. This specifically is a 2020, so a little bit older, and that's because, for whatever reason, there is possibly a little bit more faith in Volvo electrics, possibly because they've been doing hybrids a little bit longer than some of the competitors, possibly because people who like Volvos were maybe a little bit easier to convince to go into electric, whatever the reason may be. You're looking in the UK at 60% depreciation after 5 years. So we are looking a little bit older on this one, and 51.9, so just shy of the 52% mark in the USA. But the thing I love about these cars is the fact that they still feel behind the wheel like a Volvo. They've got that, there's a few manufacturers that build cars like this, and the way I would explain it is they feel like they can take a curb strike and carry on. What I mean by that is some cars feel so well built around the axles, around the driveline, that if you happen to catch a curve on it, you don't feel that shudder through the whole body. The wheel just kind of clangs in, takes the knock, you don't feel it in the driver's seat. And Volvo, Jaguar Land Rover actually are well known for this. If you ever drive a Jaguar and wonder why it feels so sort of tough when it gets, you know, if you find a particularly bad road surface, it's because it has to pass the same testing as a Land Rover Defender does for curb strikes and things like that. Volvo, because of where they are in the world, because they have a reputation to maintain, they've got that feeling that, look, if you end up going through a colossal pothole that you didn't see because it was an icy road, they're just going to keep going. And the Recharge model doesn't feel differently. It keeps going in that way. It feels very, very solid from behind the wheel. So a nice pick. And the fact that, especially in the UK, you could be looking at a really big discount. The only thing I would say, like many of these, the older you go, the less time you've got left on that battery warranty. You can look at third-party companies to extend that warranty, or, as I say, there are, the Hevra organisation is giving more options to owners as they get into older EV ownership. And that's why, well, it's part of the reason why you're seeing 10, 12-year-old Nissan Leafs still on the road. BMW i3s at, you know, what we're going up for, over 10 years old now, still on the road. So, yes, you need to be, you know, a little bit more cautious than you would be, say, with a combustion car that you've owned, you know, 15 different variations of. But I like the Volvo one. People have lots of opinions on it, but this could be one. It doesn't look that different to the regular XC40 if that's important to you. Now, the next one, we step over to Korea, and it is the Kia Niro. So depending on your market, you either know this as the Kia Niro EV or the e-Niro. It was only sold for a short period of time. So I looked between 2019 and 2021. It's there is a newer model, boxier model, but I was looking at the previous generation because that's where the bargain is really. 62% depreciation in the UK, actually just shy of 62% depreciation, and 55% depreciation in the USA. I think that stronger figure in the USA, again, is because when these came out, they offered what few manufacturers really were able to do, and that's actually bring in competitive pricing into the EV market. A few manufacturers were able to do it, but Not that many, if I'm honest. And there's been lots of promises over the last few years. Yes, we'll be able to, offer a cheap EV, and then you see it and it's not that cheap and the range is awful, or, they've stripped out everything or whatever it may be. Kia were one of the first ones to really say, no, actually, look, this is like our regular Niro, but just electric. And yeah, it's a little bit more money, but if you had sort of grants, whatever it was in your country that could help with the cost price brand new, they were affordable. And I think that's meant there's quite a few out there, but the demand is also reasonably high. Now, on the next one, I thought I'd throw one in there that you need to be taking your brave pills every single morning if you go for this one. But as much as I have to throw out a massive buyer beware, the deal was too good not to throw into this video. Well, let's just get straight into it. This was a car, doesn't exist anymore, didn't exist for very long. The Fisker Ocean. Okay, you can get these registered 2023, 2024. Some I found registered 2025, and the list price of these was, up in in the UK, sort of 75, 80,000 pounds. In the USA, about $100,000. Now, 65% off, easy 65% off for nearly new cars. In the US, about the same figure, 64% is what I settled on in the end. The only thing is, and I said this to a friend of mine who has been in the industry for years, worked in engineering departments, worked in product, and the first thing he said to me is, so it's one windscreen away from a write-off. And I thought that was an interesting way to put it. Because the car was made and then the company went bankrupt, there's a lot of things on this car. It's not built off the base of another vehicle. So things like the windscreen are unique to it. So if you can't find a windscreen and yours gets cracked, you'll find one that's being dismantled for parts. But, and there's lots of other finicky bits. I really want to put a big buyer beware on this, because while the price is wildly, to see, I think I found one that was I think it was in the US, and the dealer was holding on to it. They'd obviously registered it new a year ago, driven it around a little bit as a demonstrator. It'd done like 2,000 miles. And from the original price to then the discounted retail price that it had to get rid of them, to then further discounting, it was like $50,000, $60,000 just discounted on a car that really had never been driven. There is a community building up around the car, though, to try and keep them going. And that's mainly from the software end, because ultimately, I joked about the windscreen. If the software tries to update and then something won't work because it needs an update or whatever else, and it just bricks the whole car. Yeah, not a great situation to be in. But there is a community of owners, of people that love the car, that are getting hold of the dealer level stuff to try and keep these cars going forward. So while you need to be taking all the brave pills, this is essentially a brand new car for a third of the price, just over. So, and it's very, very unique. You see them on the road and you're like, oh, not going to see one of those again. The next one, a little bit more of an obvious choice if we're talking about SUVs and electric cars, the Tesla Model X. Now, I look specifically at the 90D and 100D. These are older cars. They're the oldest on the list. So around the 2017, 2016, depending on where you are. The thing I liked about these is that you can have whatever opinion you want on Tesla, but owning one and having access to the supercharger network, especially if you do not have home charging, and that's the critical sort of turning point, I think, for Tesla a lot of the time. You can have a Tesla and just rely on the charging network that they have. Other ones, the cost of the charging network can be a factor. The pain in the arse that it is sometimes to get these things charged up, versus, saw a guy the other day doing an airport run in a car I was testing, and he just drove into the services, like straight into a spot. It must have been 4 seconds from entering to being stopped, and he did a one move. It was, he got out the car, grabbed the charging thing, jammed it into the socket, and walked off. I thought, can't really argue with that, can it? It's got all the scanners. It can tell what the car is. His account's already registered. Boom, it's charging. I will say on the other side of it, though, there is probably a reason why the discount is heavy on this, and it features in place 10 on our list. It is older, but we're talking about 68% depreciation. 68.4 is the final figure for the UK for average mileage. But bearing in mind, average mileage on a car that's closing in 10 years old is quite high. 75%, just shy of the 75, 74.7% off in the USA. I mean, if you need an SUV, if you need something electric, and you don't mind the Tesla badge, and they're not the most engaging cars. I will say that about Tesla. Having driven lots of them from the driver's seat, they've got lots of tech, and if that's you, great. They will really suit how you like to drive. If you're a bit more used to cars that have, lots of buttons and they're a little bit maybe driver focused, and you can feel through the seat that they're trying to have a conversation with the road through the wheels, this possibly isn't the car. But that's putting some criticism against the car that's probably a little bit unfair, because lots of SUV EVs feel like that these days. It's just the Tesla was the first one that we sort of had come into the testing world, and you're comparing it at the time against cars like the previous generation X5, which was just fantastic for communicating through the road. So it's unfair. A good pick, and with such a huge discount. The only thing I would say, I know someone who has one, who has owned it now, I think about 5 years, and they've started to struggle a little bit with battery capacity. They found that the drop-off is more than they expected, and it's something I think Tesla know about, and they got better and better as the years went on with the X. With the X model, it's really about, if you can go newer, you'll start paying a bit more, but the software's that little bit better, hardware's that little bit better, especially if you're going sort of 2018-ish onwards. So let's comment on that one. Now we go into the real bottom end. Now we are huge discounts, but 50-50 on whether you want to own these next two. I actually, having driven both of them, I'm not as critical as most people with them, okay? But I can see why people are. Okay, so the number 11 on the list is the Audi e-tron 55, 2019 to 2020. This is before it becomes the Q8 sort of e-tron. So the Q8, they sort of mess around with the names. They start off with just, it's an e-tron 55, and then they realize they're going to drop that naming convention. So they go Q8, but e-tron model, okay? If you get one of the ones that's just a 55, so that's pre sort of the update of the naming, 71% depreciation, and 61.2 was the final figure in the USA that I came up with. And the interesting thing for me was when I was looking for these used, so we ran it through the model and everything else, knock out a load of other cars that don't quite get onto there. And I saw quite a few of these that had been really nicely kept. And I think what happened is people that were Audi enthusiasts, for whatever reason, had ended up with one of these brand new. Maybe they had Audi diesels on sort of company deals before, and then company rules changed. So they went and said, well, I want an SUV. Maybe they had a Q5 or something before, and they got one of these. But actually, in the industry, we always would say that car's clean. And we don't mean that someone's got a sponge out. What we mean is that the body lines are still good. There's no dents. There's minimal number of scratches on them. The driver's seat isn't worn like a taxi. That's the sort of definition of clean, because when we're valuing cars, you have clean, sort of average, and then poor. And so when you say clean, you don't mean that the car's clean. You mean that the actual body lines, the paint, the interior is in all really good shape. And I was surprised at how many of these I would class as clean. So not sure why they were an exception, but if these things are important to you, to buying one that's looking good condition, especially in the UK, to have 70% off, but you are coming towards the end of the battery warranty. So that's something to consider. Now, number 12 on the list, I'll give you a second to have a little guess, but there is a buyer's guide actually for this car, if that helps. If you've been a long time viewer of the channel, you might sort of start to think, hold on, what could be it? What could it be? What could it be? Jaguar. The Jaguar I-PACE. 2019 was the model the year that I set on. 75% 71% off in the UK, 71.2% in the USA, but a word of warning on the US figure, because of this sort of the Waymo deal, which sort of Fleet bought loads of these cars, it gets moved around quite a lot. And so if you're in a state that has had a lot of Waymo vehicles sort of sent to it to be put onto the private market and sold off, you may find that the discount is more like the UK. If you're not in one of those states and it's been a privately owned car, it might be a little bit higher than the 71. It might be sort of 65%, but it's just something to bear in mind if you're in the US. There isn't that variation in the UK, but in the US, I say, the fact Waymo bought so many of these and still are driving around in them today means that they can have some really heavy depreciation if you buy one of those ex-Waymo cars. But depending on which one you get, it may have pretty heavy usage on it, and it may feel like that. The advantage being, if you get an ex-Waymo car, the ones I saw were very clean. I guess because they've been self-driving and all this sort of stuff, they've been kept in sort of private car park lots, so they haven't got door dings and things like that, which is nice to have. Let's jump into the two wild cards. Now, the wild card picks are wild. And maybe you have to be a little bit mad to go for them, but I had to pick some up. The first one is US only. In fact, both of them are US only, but there is a small number of them coming over to UK shores. I even found on this first one, there's a company somewhere, I think it was actually in the Middle East, that are converting them to right-hand drive. No doubt the Australians will start converting these. The Aussies love to do a right-hand drive conversion on an American car. The GMC Hummer EV SUV, 23 to 24, you're looking already with low miles at like 33% off, so a third after just a few years. You know, these cars started at really high prices, but essentially near new ones have some great discounts on them. I did find as high as sort of over 36%, but as low as 20%. So it really depends who's owned it, what mileage they've done, what condition it's in, like any used car, really. The interesting thing for me was I found a few companies that were exporting them out of the US and bringing them over to Europe, where you probably don't know this if you're in the US, but in Europe, we cannot drive one of these on a standard driving license. So in Europe, we have weighted class licenses. There's an exception to that if you're above a certain age. I don't know what it would be, but there's a sort of grandfathered in rule that lets you drive 7.5 tons. But, you know, for most people, 3.5 tons is the cutoff before you need to do additional testing to then get 7.5 tons. And then you go up to, I think, 20 tons, and then 44 tons is a heavy goods license. Now, the Hummer EV is sitting around 4.5 tons because it's got a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. These things are not efficient. One of the things that is actually very difficult to pin down on EVs at the moment is efficiency. How many miles per kilowatt hour they're doing. On the Hummer, not that hard, because GMC will quote you a range of like 310 miles on the battery, 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. So 1.5 miles of per kilowatt hour is proper. That's Hummer H1 fuel economy. You know, that's really poor. If you have an EV and you're getting less than 3 miles per kilowatt hour from it, that's not great. You know, unless it's something that's directed to being a performance car, that's not great. Really, 4 is sort of a good number where manufacturers should be aiming at. To be in the 1 point something, pretty poor. But yeah, interesting that these are coming over to Europe in small numbers, and there are a few companies that are even transferring them to be right-hand drive. So if you see one driving around London or something, then you know maybe it's been converted and it's been exported over here. But be a bit wary of it because it weighs a lot. You don't want to have an accident with one of these things, even if you're in a Range Rover or something. These are rolling roadblocks, and the acceleration means they can be going at no miles an hour and then going at 60. So you want to be careful on that one. Last car on the list, Rivian R1S, 2022 to 2024s, 20% off. These are early life vehicles. I just liked them. I thought they deserve to be in the list as a wild card. I think if you're out there and you're looking for an EV SUV and you're thinking, well, what can I grab hold of that suits me and has a few funky things. I like the fact it's got this sort of barrel holder the right way through, so you can get skis in across ways. And yeah, I think they're a pretty interesting vehicle. We don't have them in Europe yet. I'm not sure when we will. There is talk of them coming over here with a different Rivian model that's slightly smaller. But if you're in the US, yeah, 20% off. And I think we'll have to see about the company's future and what they do. But as it stands at the moment, at least, they have a reasonable reputation for a new manufacturer. Bearing in mind, my view is that car manufacturers after 50 years really show who they are. If they've been around for 100 years, you've got a great sense of how this company survives. But in this case, when you've got car companies, we started out with that MG. They've been around for a very, very long time, but not in this newest format where they're Chinese owned. That's only a few years. So I think we need to give them a bit more time to really understand them. And Rivian do fall into that pack. But what I know about the company, they are looking long-term into the future, how they can be a real choice for people. So that is the end. But I want to thank all of the channel members who have made this video possible. It does take a lot of time and a lot of research to put in to get these videos to where they need to be for you all to watch. So having channel members who are just sort of paying in, we try and release videos a bit early for channel members. If you'd like to join, you can do. There's a button just below. And just a thank you to all of you that have. And if you've enjoyed it, consider subscribing for more. There are lots of buyer's guides on the channel to check out as well if you're currently looking for a used or a new car, along with some car reviews. Until next time, enjoy and have a nice day.